There is a particular quiet that settles over the west wing of Harrogate after the second bell, and I had learned in my years of standing post to trust that quiet the way a sailor trusts the color of the sky. When it changed, when a footfall came where no footfall should, when a door that had always stood open was suddenly shut, when the laughter of a child that used to spill down the marble like water simply stopped, I noticed. That was my trade. Not marching, not saluting, not the polished brass that the tourists came to photograph. Noticing. And by the spring the whole affair came to light. I had been noticing something wrong in the West Wing for the better part of 2 months. My name is Corwin Vale, and I was, at that time, a serjeant of the King's Guard assigned to the interior posts of the Royal House of Harrogate, which is to say I stood the corridors and the antechambers where the family lived, rather than the great gilded gates where the crowds gathered. It is a duty men in my company sometimes grumbled over, because there are no cheering visitors in the family wing and no thumbnail glory in a corridor at midnight. But I never grumbled. The gates guard a symbol. The corridors guard the living. I had always known which of the two I would rather be trusted with. The living I was trusted with, most of all, was a girl of 9 named Princess Maelin. She was the daughter of Princess Alaric, the king's own daughter, and she was the sort of child who made the old stone feel younger for having her in it. She ran when she should have walked. She hid behind the tall clocks and jumped out at the footmen and shrieked with delight when they pretended to be frightened, which they always did, because a footman who could not be frightened by a 9-year-old had no business in that house. She had 2 brothers, Torrin, who was 11 and grave as a little judge, and Bram, who was 6 and believed with his whole heart that he could not sleep unless a guard was standing where he could see him. I had stood that watch for Bram more nights than I could count, and I counted it an honor, though I would never have said so aloud. I tell you all this so you understand what the quiet meant when it came. When a house has a child like Maelin in it, the silence of that child is not peace. It is a wound. It began, as these things do, with something so small that a lazier man would have let it pass. It was a Tuesday in the last week of March, and I had come on duty at the change of the afternoon watch to find that Maelin's nurse was not at her post outside the schoolroom. Her name was Dame Prudence Ashby, and she had raised Maelin from the cradle, a broad, warm, iron-spined woman who loved that child fiercely and who had, in 20 years of service to the house, never once left her charge unattended in the corridor hour. I asked the footman where Dame Ashby had gone. He would not meet my eye. He said only that there had been a rearrangement of the household, and that the new attendants would be seeing to the young princess going forward. New attendants, I said, by whose order? Her Majesty the Queen Consort, he said, and hurried on with his tray. Now, you must understand the shape of that house to understand why those 4 words made the hair rise on my arms. Queen Consort Morwenna was the king's second wife. His first, the late Queen Isolde, mother of Princess Alaric, had died when Alaric was herself a girl, and the king in his grief and his loneliness had married again some years after. Morwenna had come to Harrogate with 2 grown children of her own, Lord Cassius and Lady Verena, and a manner as smooth and cool as polished glass. She was unfailingly correct. She was never once, in all my years, heard to raise her voice, and there was not a serjeant in my company who trusted her farther than he could throw the throne she sat beside. She was not Maelin's grandmother. She was not Maelin's blood at all, and there was no reason in heaven or the household ledger why the raising of Princess Alaric's daughter should have fallen under her hand. A rearrangement of the household, I said to myself, standing alone in that corridor, and I did not like the sound of it. I could have reported it up the chain and let it become someone else's Tuesday. That is what a comfortable man does. But I had stood those corridors long enough to know that the wrongs which destroy a house never arrive announced. They arrive as rearrangements, as small conveniences, as reasonable-sounding changes that no one quite objects to until the day it is too late to object at all. So I did not file it and forget it. I began, quietly, to watch. The first thing I watched was who came and went from Maelin's rooms. Within a fortnight, every face I knew had been replaced. Dame Ashby was gone, retired, the ledger said, though I had spoken to her not a month before and heard her plan to serve the girl until Maelin was grown. The 2 under-nurses were gone. The old music master who had taught Maelin her scales and let her play badly and laugh about it was gone, replaced by a severe woman who kept the schoolroom door shut and the pianoforte silent. Even the little maid who brought the morning chocolate, a girl Maelin adored, had been sent to the laundries. In their places came new people, quiet people, correct people, people who did not, I noticed, ever quite look me in the eye, and who all shared one thing in common. Every last one of them had come into the house in Queen Consort Morwenna's train, or owed their place to her, or reported, I was nearly sure of it, to her. The second thing I watched was the doors. There is an art to a house's doors that only the men who stand among them all night ever learn. A door tells you the truth of a room, and in those weeks, the doors of the west wing began to lie. The passage that connected Maelin's apartments to her mother's, a passage the 2 of them had run back and forth through a dozen times a day, was found locked one morning, and the key, I was told, had been mislaid. The garden door, through which Maelin had always tumbled out to play with her brothers, developed a stiff new bolt that only the new attendants could work. The schoolroom, which had always stood open to the corridor, so that any passing member of the family might look in and wave, was kept shut now, and a new maid sat outside it like a warder. And the third thing I watched, the thing that decided me, was the child herself. I saw less of Maelin with each passing week, and when I did see her she was changed, not hurt. I want to be plain about this, because it is the whole shape of the matter and I will not have it misunderstood. The child was never hurt. No hand was ever laid on her that I saw or that I later learned of. She was fed, she was clothed, she was warm. She was, by every visible measure a careless observer might apply, perfectly well cared for. But she was fading. The running had stopped. The shrieking behind the clocks had stopped. When I passed her in the corridor, walking between 2 of the new attendants with her small hands folded in front of her the way they had evidently taught her, she did not jump out at me, did not grin, did not do any of the 100 small anarchic things a 9-year-old does when she is herself. She walked. She looked at the floor. And once, only once early on, before they had fully learned her roots and mine, she looked up at me as she passed, and there was in that look a question so large and so frightened that it has never entirely left me. "Where is my mother?" the look said. "Why can't I find my brothers? Why is everyone I love gone, and why will no one tell me why?" She was 9 years old, and she did not know how to ask it out loud. So she asked it with her eyes, to the one man in the corridor she still recognized. I gave her the only answer I could give without breaking my post and my orders both. I looked back at her steadily, the way you look at a frightened soldier so he knows he is seen, and I let her read in my face the one thing I most needed her to know. "I see it too. You are not imagining it. And you are not alone." She held my eyes for the length of 3 steps. Then the attendant on her left said something low, and Maelin dropped her gaze back to the floor and walked on, and the schoolroom door shut behind her with that soft, correct, terrible click I had come to hate. I went off duty that night, and I did not sleep. You will ask why I did not simply go to the king. It is the reasonable question, and I asked it of myself 100 times in those weeks. The answer is that a sergeant of the guard does not walk into the private study of King Alaric of Eldermore and accuse the Queen Consort, his wife, of quietly stealing the life out of his granddaughter, on the strength of locked doors and a frightened look, not without proof. Not without being able to lay a thing on the table that a reasonable man, and a grieving lonely one who loved his difficult second wife, could not wave away as a sergeant's overwrought fancy. To accuse and fail would be to be transferred to the farthest cold gate of the realm within the hour, and worse, to slam shut the one door left open. The moment I spoke and was disbelieved, Morwenna would know she was watched, and she would simply close the last gaps and finish what she had begun, and there would be no one left inside the wing who saw. So I did the harder thing. I stayed silent and I stayed close, and I made myself into exactly what the house believed me to be, a piece of the furniture, a red coat and a bear skin, a man who saw nothing because men like me were not thought to see. I let them forget I was there, and forgotten I watched everything. I learned the new attendants' shifts and their weaknesses. I learned which of them was cruel and which was merely frightened of losing a good place. I learned that the new governess reported to Lady Verena, and that Lady Verena reported, in the small hours when she thought the corridors empty, to her mother. I learned that the locked passage to Princess Alara's rooms was not the only barrier between the mother and her child, that Alara herself was being managed, told the girl was settling to her studies, and not to be disturbed, fed a soft, steady stream of reasons why it was better just now that she not visit. A woman does not fight a door she does not know is locked. Morwenna had locked a great many doors, and behind each one she had hung a reasonable explanation like a curtain, so that no one on either side could quite see the bars. It was a scheme of remarkable patience, not a blow, not a crime a magistrate could name in an afternoon, just a slow, quiet, methodical isolation, a child pruned away from everyone who loved her, one attendant and one door and one cancelled visit at a time, until she belonged to no one but the woman who had arranged it. I did not yet know why Morwenna wanted the girl so badly. I only knew that she did, and that every week the walls drew in a little closer, and that somewhere behind those correct shut doors, a 9-year-old was learning to fold her hands and look at the floor and stop expecting anyone to come. Someone was going to come. I had decided that much on the first frightened look. I simply had to be cleverer and more patient and more certain than the woman who had built the cage, and I had to be all three without ever once letting her see that the furniture in the corridor had eyes. What I did not know, that sleepless night at the end of March, was that I was not the only one who had begun to notice. Far up in the house, in the wing where the Crown Prince kept his study and his silence, another pair of eyes had caught on the same small wrongness, a cancelled visit, a name struck from a ledger, a laughing child gone suddenly quiet. And Crown Prince Rowan, who was as patient a man as I have ever served and a great deal cleverer, had begun, in his own way and for his own reasons, to pull at the same loose thread I had been holding all along. We were, though neither of us yet knew it, already working the same case from opposite ends of the same house. And when at last those two threads met, the serjeant in the corridor who had already stepped in, and the prince in the study who had just begun to uncover it, the cage that Queen Consort Morwenna had spent 2 quiet months building was going to come apart faster than she had ever imagined it could. But I am ahead of myself. Let me tell it as it happened. Crown Prince Rowan told me afterward, when the whole business was done and we could sit and speak as men who had fought the same fight, how it had come to him. And because his part is as much of this story as mine, I will set it down as he gave it to me, in his own careful ordering, before I returned to the corridor and my own long watch. It had begun for him with a birthday. Prince Bram, the youngest of Alara's 3, had turned 6 in the first week of March, and there had been a small family supper for it, the kind of easy, noisy, jam-smeared occasion that the king loved, and that Morwenna endured with a smile you could have skated on. Rowan had been abroad on the king's business and had missed it. When he came home a fortnight later, he asked Bram, as uncles do, whether the boy had liked his cake, and whether Maelin had helped him blow out the candles the way she always did. And Bram, 6 years old and without the least idea he was saying anything important, said, Maelin wasn't allowed to come down. Rowan told me he had let that pass in the moment children muddle things, and had gone to find Torin, the grave 11-year-old, to check the tale. And Torin, who muddled nothing, had looked up at his uncle with a face far too old for his years and said, She's not allowed a lot of things now. We're not to bother her at her studies. Grandmother Morwenna says. And then, more quietly, in the way a careful boy tests whether a grown man can be trusted with a true thing, I don't think she likes it there, but nobody asks her. Grandmother Morwenna. The boy used the word because he had been taught to, and it curdled in Rowan's ear exactly as it had curdled in mine, because she was not their grandmother. Their grandmother was the late Queen Isolde, 10 years in her tomb. Morwenna had folded herself into that empty word the way she folded herself into every empty space in the house, quietly, correctly, and without anyone quite noticing until she was already occupying it. Rowan was, above all things, a methodical man. He did not go storming down to the West Wing on the word of 2 boys, one of whom was 6. He did what a careful heir does. He went and looked at the record. He was crown prince. The household ledgers were open to him, and no clerk would think twice about the heir asking after the ordinary running of the house. So over the next several days, without a word to anyone about why, he read. And what he read troubled him more than anything the boys had said. He found that in the space of 6 weeks, the entire staff attending Princess Maelin had been turned over. Not 1 dismissal, which happens, nor 2, which is unremarkable, but the whole of it, root and branch, and every replacement drawn from a single source. He found Dame Ashby's name entered as retired at her own request, and he knew, as I knew, that this was a lie, because Dame Ashby had been at his own christening, and had told him not 2 months past that she meant to see Maelin to her wedding day. He found requisitions for new locks on 3 doors of the West Wing, signed off under the Queen Consort's household seal. He found a schedule of the young princess's days so tightly ruled, lessons, meals, rest, all of it inside her own apartments, none of it in company with her mother or her brothers, that a grown clerk kept to it would have called himself a prisoner. And he found the visits. This was the thing that turned Rowan's unease into certainty, and he told me of it with a cold anger I had not heard in him before. Princess Alara, Maelin's own mother, the king's own daughter, had over those 6 weeks requested to see her daughter no fewer than 11 times. 11 requests, entered dutifully in the daybook as they came in. And beside each one, in the same neat hand, a reason it had not happened. The princess is at her lessons. The princess is resting. The princess is unwell and not to be excited. The princess is settling, and it is thought best she not be unsettled. 11 times a mother had reached for her child, and 11 times a curtain of reasonable words had come down between them, and every one of those curtains had been hung, when Rowan traced the hand and the seal, under the direction of Queen Consort Morwenna. He sat with that daybook a long time, he told me. Because 11 refusals is not an accident. 1 is an accident. 2 is bad luck. 11 is a wall built brick by careful brick, by someone who had decided that a mother and a daughter would not meet, and had the patience to make it look like fortune rather than a fist. And here Rowan was as honest with himself as I had been forced to be. A wall of reasonable words is a devil to prove. Every single refusal, taken alone, was defensible. Children do have lessons. Children do rest. A child settling into a new routine might, reasonably, be kept quiet a while. If he went to his father the king with the daybook and cried scheme, Morwenna had 11 soft answers ready, 1 for each entry, and the king, who loved his difficult wife and hated discord in his house, and had spent 10 years learning to give her the benefit of every doubt for the sake of peace, might well hear 11 reasonable explanations and 1 overwrought son, and choose the peace. And if he chose the peace, Rowan understood, the wall would simply be finished. Morwenna would learn she was watched, and she would close the last small gaps that Rowan's own reading had not yet found, and Maelin would vanish, not from the house, but from her own family, sealed inside a routine and a set of attendants that answered to 1 woman alone, until the girl herself forgot there had ever been another way to live. There would be no crime to point at. Only a quiet, correct, motherless child, and a queen consort who would say, with perfect truth, that the girl had never been harmed a day in her life. So Rowan, like me, did the hard, patient thing. He did not accuse, he gathered. And because he was the crown prince and could go where a serjeant could not, he began to pull threads I could never have reached. His first thread was the *Y. A woman does not build a cage for a child she does not want something from. What did Morwenna want with Maelin? He went quietly to the office of the household chancery, where the settlements of the royal family are kept, the marriage portions, the entailments, the long dry documents that decide who inherits what when the great ones die. And there, after 2 evenings reading by candle, he found it. The late Queen Isolde had died a wealthy woman in her own right, with lands and revenues that were hers before ever she married the king, and by the terms of her will these had not passed to her husband. They had been settled on her line, on her daughter Alara for her life, and thereafter, entire, on Alara's * daughter, on Maelin. The girl was, though she was 9 and knew nothing of it, the sole heir to the whole of Queen Isolde's private fortune, a fortune that dwarfed anything Morwenna's own 2 children would ever see. And there was a clause, Rowan read it 3 times to be sure, providing that until Maelin came of age, the management of that fortune and the guardianship of her person might fall to such member of the royal household as the girl's nearest guardian should be unable to serve. Such member of the royal household. Morwenna had spent 6 weeks making Alara unable to serve, walling the mother off from the child with 11 reasonable refusals, and installing herself, attendant by attendant and door by door, as the one member of the household who did. She was not stealing the girl for cruelty's sake, nor for any madness. She was stealing the girl because the girl was a key, and behind that key lay a fortune and a standing that would set Morwenna's own line above Alara's for a generation. It was, Rowan said, the coldest thing he had ever read, and it was, he knew at once, still not enough to move his father. Motive is not proof. A clever advocate could call the whole reading a coincidence. The settlement was real, the isolation was real, but joining them was a son's dark imagining. He needed one thing more. He needed to catch the scheme * speaking, to lay before the king not an inference but a fact, a thing said or written by Morwenna herself that no reasonable curtain of words could cover. And it was in the hunt for that one thing, the proof that would turn certainty into a case, that the crown prince at the top of the house and the serjeant in the corridor at the bottom of it were at last about to find each other. Now I return to the corridor, and to my own part, for the 2 of us came together by a road neither of us planned. I had, in those weeks of watching, done more than watch. I had done the one thing a man in my place could do without being seen to do anything at all. I had made myself useful to the child in the small ways that leave no mark on a daybook. When Maelin's route to her lessons took her past my post, I made certain I was always exactly where she could see me, so that at least once each day she would know one friendly face still stood in the house. When the new attendants grew careless and left her a moment alone in the corridor, which happened, for cruelty makes people lazy, I would say a low word to her, nothing that could be reported, only * good morning, princess. * said in the ordinary way, so she would remember that ordinary still existed. Once, when I saw that the garden door had been bolted against her on a bright afternoon, and she was standing at the window watching her brothers play below with her whole small body pressed to the glass, I sent word by a footman I trusted that the young princess seemed to want air, and a groundsman, hearing it, made a point of walking the boys past her window so she could at least wave to them through it. Small things, furniture things. The kind of help a red coat can give that no one thinks to forbid, because no one thinks the red coat capable of giving it. But I had done one thing more, and it was that one thing that broke the case open. I had begun to keep a record. Every night off duty, in a plain soldier's notebook that I carried in my own coat and showed to no one, I set down what I had seen that day, dated and timed and dry as a report. Which door was locked, which attendant relieved which, what visitor was turned away and by whom, the hour Lady Verena came down the back stair, and the hour she went up again. I did not know when I began it what I meant to do with such a book. I only knew, from long years of standing where wrongs were done, that a wrong is a slippery thing and memory is a poor witness, and that if ever the day came when someone with the power to act would listen to me, I did not mean to stand before him with nothing in my hands but a feeling. So I wrote it all down, 6 weeks of it, a patient, dated, unanswerable account of a cage being built, kept by the one man the builders had forgotten could see. The night the two threads met, Crown Prince Rowan came down to the West Wing himself. He came alone, after the second bell, in a plain dark coat with no attendant, which was not his habit. And he came, I understood later, because he had exhausted what the ledgers could tell him, and had resolved to do the last thing a careful man does when the papers run out, which is to go and look with his own eyes. He came to see his niece's routine for himself, to walk the corridor she was walled into and count the locked doors he had read about. And he had chosen the dead of night, because it was the only hour the wing was quiet enough to walk unwatched. He had not counted on the furniture having eyes. I saw him from 30 paces, a dark figure moving with a care that told me at once he did not wish to be seen, and my hand went to my hilt before I knew his face. Then the lamp caught him and I knew the Crown Prince, and I came to attention and he stopped. And for a moment we simply looked at one another in that cold corridor, the heir who had been reading about a scheme in the dry pages of a ledger, and the serjeant who had been living inside it for 6 weeks. Neither of us spoke. And then Rowan, who missed very little, saw where we were standing. We were standing outside the locked passage to Princess Ilara's rooms, the one whose key had been mislaid. He looked at that bolted door, and he looked at me, at the interior serjeant who stood these corridors every night, who would have seen that door locked, who would know, if any man in the house knew, exactly when it had been locked and by whom. And I watched the same thought reach him that had reached me 8 weeks before. "Serjeant," he said very low, "how long has that door been locked?" A sergeant of the guard answers a direct question from the air, but there is answering and there is answering. I could have said some weeks, "Your Highness, correct and empty," and let him pass on, and kept my head down and my place safe. That is what the furniture does. Instead, I looked the Crown Prince full in the eye, and I made the decision I had been circling for 8 weeks, that if the man who could act ever stood before me and asked the right question, I would not hide behind my post. I would trust him with the truth, and take what came. 22 days, Your Highness," I said. "It was bolted on the 3rd of March, the same morning Dame Ashby was dismissed. I have the hour if you want it. I have the hour of a great many things." He went very still. "You have the hour," he repeated. "I have kept a book," I said, "since the last week of February, when the young princess's household began to be rearranged. Every day, every door, every visitor turned away, every change of the attendants and who ordered it. I did not know who I would ever show it to." I paused, and then I said the true thing, the thing that had cost me 8 weeks of sleep. "I have known for some time that something was being done to that child, Your Highness. I could not prove it and I could not stop it alone, and I was not willing to speak and be disbelieved and lose the only pair of eyes she had left inside these walls. So I watched, and I wrote it down, and I waited for someone who could act. I think perhaps I have been waiting for you. I have served 4 kings' worth of great men, and I have learned to read the faces of the powerful, which are trained from birth to show nothing. I saw a great many things cross Rowan's face in that dark corridor, surprise, and a kind of grief, and under it a hard, bright thing that I recognized because it had been living in my own chest for 8 weeks. It was the relief of a man who has been carrying a heavy thing alone, and has just discovered he is not alone after all. "Show me the book," he said. I did not have it on me. A man does not carry such a thing on duty, but I told him where it was, and the next evening, off duty and in plain clothes, I brought it to a small side room off the library that Rowan had named, and I laid it in his hands and I stood while he read it. It took him an hour. He read every page, and once or twice he stopped and asked me a question. "This attendant, the one you name here, she is the one who reports to Lady Verena." And I answered, and he read on. When at last he closed it, he sat a while with his hand flat on the cover, and then he looked up at me, and there was in his voice something I had not expected and have never forgotten. There was respect. "Do you understand what you have done, Sergeant Vale?" he said. "For 6 weeks you have kept the only honest record of this that exists in the house. Everything in the daybook is written to lie. This," he tapped the plain soldier's cover, "is the only true account. Every locked door timed to a dismissal, every visit refused matched to the reason they gave and the hour they gave it. My father can wave away a settlement and a suspicion. He cannot wave away this. This is the spine the whole thing has been missing." Then he told me what he had found: the 11 refused visits, the wall of reasonable words, and at the last, the settlement. Queen Isolde's fortune, and Maelin the sole heir, and the clause that would fall to whichever member of the household could show that the girl's own mother was unable to serve. And when he had laid it out, the 2 accounts, his of the *y and mine of the how, fit together like the 2 halves of a broken seal, and there was no longer any doubt at all in that little room what had been done, or why, or by whom. But between knowing a thing and being able to end it there lies a hard country, and Rowan, who was the more experienced hand at this kind of war, made me see it plainly before we went a step further. "If we take this to my father tonight," he said, "we lose. Hear me, Sergeant, because it matters. Everything we have is true, and everything we have can still be talked around. She will say the staff were changed for cause and offer a dozen small faults against each one dismissed. She will say the doors were locked for the child's safety after some invented fright. She will say the visits were declined for the girl's own good and produce a physician to swear the child needed quiet. And every one of those answers is a lie, and every one of them will sound like the truth, and my father, who loves peace in his house more than he loves being right, and who has spent 10 years trained by that woman to give her the benefit of every doubt, may well choose to believe the smooth answer over the 2 men accusing his wife. And the moment he does, she wins everything. She learns she is watched. She closes the last doors. And your book becomes the confession of a serjeant who slandered the Queen Consort and will be posted to the coldest gate in the realm by morning, and there will be no one left inside these walls who sees. We get one throw of this veil. It has to land." "Then what do we need," I said, "that we do not have?" "We need her to say it," Rowan said. "Not a locked door, she can explain a door. Not a settlement, that's only paper and motive. We need Morwenna herself in her own words, saying what she means to do, the plan spoken aloud, past all the reasonable curtains. A thing that cannot be a coincidence and cannot be a sergeant's fancy, because it comes out of her own mouth. Give my father that, laid on top of your book, and even his patience will run out. Without it, we have a wall of true bricks, and no proof of the hand that laid them." It was the right reading, and I knew it, and it left us with the one hard problem. How does a sergeant and a prince get a woman as careful as Morwenna to speak her scheme aloud, when in 10 years no one had ever once heard her raise her voice or say a careless word? She was smooth glass all the way down. You do not crack smooth glass by pushing on it. You crack it by finding the one flaw already in it and putting your weight exactly there. And I knew where the flaw was. I had been watching it for 6 weeks. "She is patient," I said slowly, "but she is not finished. The whole scheme depends on the girl belonging to no one but her, and it is not quite done. The mother is walled off but not gone, the brothers still wave through the glass, the child still looks for a friendly face in the corridor. Morwenna knows it is not sealed, and there is a date coming when it must be sealed. I had it from the daybook, and from a thing one of the frightened attendants had let slip. The girl's guardianship. Under that clause you found, it is not automatic. It has to be claimed formally before the household chancery, with the child's mother shown to be unable to serve. Morwenna has petitioned to have it heard. In 11 days. Rowan's head came up. 11 days. 11 days, I said. And if that petition is granted, it is done. She is Maelin's guardian-in-law, and everything after is legal, and undoing it becomes a matter for courts and years, with the child sealed away the whole while. She has walled off the mother precisely so that she can stand before the chancery in 11 days and say, truthfully, that Princess Alara has not attended her daughter in 2 months and cannot be relied upon to serve. She built the wall to make the lie true. I looked at him. Which means for the next 11 days she is not patient. She is hurried. She is checking her locks and stopping her gaps and driving her people, because she has a date and she is not yet certain she will make it. And a careful woman in a hurry, Your Highness, is a careful woman who makes mistakes. That was the flaw, not the glass, but the pressure behind it. And a plan began to take shape between us in that little room, not a trap of force, for neither of us would risk so much as a raised voice near that child, but a trap of asterisk pressure, a way to make a hurried woman say aloud the thing she was hurrying toward, with the right ears listening and the right witnesses placed. It would take all 11 days. It would take Rowan's rank and my 6 weeks of knowing every shift and every stair in that wing. And it would turn, in the end, on the one thing Morwenna had never troubled to guard against, because she had never once imagined it could matter, the eyes of the furniture in the corridor. We began the next morning. The plan had 3 parts, and Rowan laid them out with the coolness of a man who had planned campaigns. First, we would restore, quietly and without confrontation, the one thing Morwenna most needed gone, the child's contact with those who loved her, not to trigger the fight yet, but to make Morwenna feel the sand running out. Second, we would find and shelter the witnesses she had scattered, above all Dame Ashby, so that when the day came there would be honest mouths to answer her smooth ones. And third, hardest of all, we would set the pressure so precisely that on some day inside those 11, a hurried Morwenna would say her scheme aloud to someone she trusted, in a place where it could be heard by someone she did not know to fear. My part in the first began that very day, and it was the smallest thing, and it undid more of her work than anything else we did. Princess Alara did not know she had asked for her daughter 11 times and been refused 11 times. She knew only that she had been told, again and again, that the girl was well and busy and best not disturbed, and being a gentle soul and half persuaded by a house full of people all saying the same reasonable thing, she had begun to believe she was being an anxious mother making a fuss. Morwenna's cruelest stroke had been to make Alara doubt her own alarm. So Rowan went to his cousin, for Alara was cousin to the crown prince, and he did not tell her the whole of it, not yet, for fear it would show in her face before we were ready. He told her only this, that he had reason to think the young princess was more lonely in her new routine than anyone realized, and that whatever she was told at the door, she should simply go down to Maelin's rooms herself, in person, unannounced, at an hour of her choosing, and stand there until she saw her child. And I made sure the door would open. I knew the shifts. I knew that on the following afternoon the sharpest of the new attendants, the one who reported to Verena, would be an hour at the household chancery on Morwenna's business, and that the girl left to mind the corridor in her place was the frightened one, the one who wanted only to keep her place and had no stomach for turning away a princess of the blood to her face. So I saw to it that I was posted at that corridor at that hour, and when Princess Alara came down and the frightened attendant rose to give her the practiced reasons, I did the one thing my post permitted. I stepped forward, and I said, in the flat correct voice of a serjeant stating a fact, "Her Highness the Princess Alara to see her daughter," said aloud, as an announcement, in front of a witness. And the frightened girl looked from the mother's face to mine, to the king's guard standing plainly on the side of the mother, and she did the thing that frightened people do. She stepped aside. I will not tell you the whole of what happened in that room, because some of it was not mine to see, and none of it was mine to give away. I will tell you only that I stood my post at the door with my back to it and my eyes forward, as a serjeant does, and that through the door I heard a sound I had not heard in 6 weeks. I heard Maelin laugh. It was a small laugh, and a startled one, the laugh of a child who has been so long careful that she has forgotten she is allowed. But it was hers, the real one, the one that used to spill down the marble. And I heard Alara's voice break on her daughter's name, and I understood in that moment, if I had ever doubted it, exactly what we were fighting for, and exactly why no reasonable curtain of words would ever be reason enough. That was the midpoint of the whole affair, though I did not name it so at the time. Up until that hour, the scheme had all run one way, Morwenna building, the two of us watching and gathering. From that hour, we were building too, and the game changed. It stopped being a question of whether we could see what she was doing. It became a race to see whether we could undo it faster than she could seal it. Morwenna felt the change within a day. Of course she did. She missed nothing that touched the girl. The sharp attendant returned from the chancery, learned that the mother had gotten past her, and reported it up. And I watched from my post as the pressure I had counted on began to bite. The locks were checked twice a day now. The frightened attendant was dismissed and replaced with a harder one. A note went up the back stair to Verena in the small hours, and Verena went up to her mother, and the whole machinery of the wing tightened another turn. Morwenna was hurrying now, checking her gaps, driving her people, because a mother had gotten through a door 11 days out from the hearing that would make her guardianship law, and she could not afford another. Good, I thought, standing my silent post. Hurried people talk. The second part fell to Rowan, and it took him 3 of the 11 days. He went quietly in himself to find Dame Ashby, the nurse, retired at her own request. He found her in a small cottage on the edge of the town below the palace, and he found her, he told me, sitting by a cold hearth in the middle of the afternoon with her hands idle in her lap, which for a woman like that was the very picture of grief. She had not retired. She had been dismissed without a reason on a Tuesday morning, told the young princess, no longer required a nurse of her age, and forbidden. She showed Rowan the letter, under the Queen Consort's seal, to attempt any further contact with the child for the young princess's own settlement. She had spent 6 weeks believing she had been cast off and that Maelin had been turned against her, and when Rowan told her the truth, that the child had not stopped loving her, that the child had been walled away from everyone, that it was all a scheme to take the girl, the old woman wept, and then she stopped weeping and stood up, and Rowan said her face went hard as a drill sergeant's, and she said, "Then tell me where to stand, your highness, and I will stand there. And let that woman try to talk her way past me." We had our honest mouth. Rowan lodged her, safe and quiet, in a house he trusted, ready to be produced when the day came, with her letter of dismissal under Morwenna's own seal, a piece of paper that gave the lie in Morwenna's own hand to the daybook's word retired. One more brick pulled out of the wall, which left the third part, the hard one, the one everything turned on. We needed Morwenna to say it aloud. And here, on the 8th of the 11 days, we very nearly lost the whole thing. The plan to make her speak was simple in shape and delicate in execution. Rowan would go to Morwenna openly, as the crown prince has every right to do, and raise mildly, reasonably, as a matter of household concern, the question of the young princess's guardianship petition. He would not accuse. He would seem, if anything, half sympathetic, a busy heir tidying a loose end. And in the course of it, he would let fall, with apparent carelessness, that the king his father had begun to ask questions about the West Wing, that Alara had complained, that the daybook was being looked at, that the matter might not go as smoothly at the chancery as she hoped. The aim was to convince Morwenna that her wall was cracking with 3 days left on her clock, and to see whether a hurried, cornered woman, believing herself found out, would move, would go to her own people to shore up the scheme, and in doing so, say the plan aloud where it could be heard. Because we had arranged the ears. There was a small withdrawing room off Morwenna's own apartments where she was in the habit of speaking with Verena and Cassius in the evenings, her council, such as it was, and where she believed herself entirely private. It adjoined, through a single wall and a disused servant's passage, a linen store that had not been opened in a decade. I knew that passage. I knew every passage in the wing. It was my trade. And on the evening of the 8th day, when Rowan had done his work and lit the fuse, I meant to be standing in that dark linen store with the household chancellor's own deputy. An honest man Rowan had taken into confidence, as my witness, close enough through that single wall to hear whatever a cornered Morwenna said to her children. It went wrong before it began. Rowan played his part flawlessly. He told me so, and I believed him, for he was a subtle man. He raised the guardianship. He seemed unbothered. He let slip that the king had begun to ask. And Morwenna, this is the thing about smooth glass, that it shows you nothing, smiled, and thanked him for his concern, and said she was so glad the family took an interest in dear Maelin's welfare, and gave not the smallest sign that anything had landed at all. Rowan came away unable to tell whether he had frightened her into motion or merely warned her that she was watched. And that same evening, when I slipped down to the disused passage to take my post in the dark behind the wall, I found the door to the linen store standing open, a lamp burning inside it, and a housemaid on her knees taking a full inventory of the shelves. Morwenna had ordered it. I learned it later and I understood it at once. It was not that she knew about that specific passage. It was worse. Warned by Rowan that the family was looking into the wing, a careful woman in a hurry had simply done what careful people do when they feel watched. She had ordered every disused room, every old passage, every forgotten corner of her wing opened, aired, inventoried, and staffed, closing every blind spot in the house at a stroke. She had not found our plan. She had smothered it by reflex, the way a cautious animal, sensing something, floods every burrow at once without knowing which one hides the hunter. My ears were shut. The one place I could have stood to hear her speak was now a lit and busy room, and would be for days, and the hearing was 3 days off. I went to Rowan that night and told him, and for the first time in the whole affair I saw him near despair. "Then it's over," he said quietly. "We have your book, and we have Ashby's letter, and we have the settlement, and it is all true, and it is all a wall of bricks with no hand shown laying them, and in 3 days she stands before the chancery and says her reasonable things, and it becomes law. We needed her voice, Vale. We reached for it, and she closed the room without even knowing we were in it." He looked at me. "Unless you can tell me another room." And I could not. I had turned over every passage in the wing in my mind, and she had, by that single reflexive order, lit and staffed every one that would have served. There was no dark corner left within earshot of Morwenna's counsel. The clever trap had failed, and it had failed not because she was cleverer than we were, but because she was afraid, and fear had made her thorough in a way cunning never would have. It is the thing they never tell you about the careful and the guilty, that their fear is a better guard than their cunning, because fear watches every door at once. We sat a long while in that little room, the prince and the serjeant, with 3 days on the clock and no way to hear the one voice we needed. And it was there, in the failure, that I understood what we had gotten wrong and where the true opening had been all along. "We have been trying to catch her speaking in private," I said slowly. "In her own rooms, to her own people, where she thinks herself safe. And she guards her private places better than anything, because she has spent 10 years being careful in them. We will never get her there. She is too good in the dark." "Then where?" said Rowan. "In the light," I said. "At the hearing. In 3 days she has to stand before the household chancery in the open and make her case. She has to say in front of the chancellor that Princess Alara is unfit to serve her own daughter and that she, Morwenna, should have the child and the fortune instead. She has to speak the plan aloud. That is the whole point of a hearing, that the claim be spoken. She has arranged everything so that when she stands there, the facts will seem to bear her out. The mother absent 2 months, the child settled in Morwenna's care, the daybook full of reasonable refusals. She means to walk in and say her scheme in the open air and have it sound like simple sense, because she has spent 2 months making the lie look like the truth. Rowan was watching me now with the old sharpness back in his eyes. Go on. We stopped trying to catch her in the dark, I said. We let her walk into the light and say it, the whole cold thing, in her own words, before the Chancellor. And we make sure that when she does, standing right there in the open where she cannot take it back, we have every honest mouth she scattered and every dated page of my book and Ashby's letter under her own seal, so that the moment the words are out of her, the truth stands up in the same room and gives them the lie. She wants a hearing. Let her have one. Only let it be the king who hears it. For the plan had one more turn in it, and it was Rowan who saw the last piece, and it was the piece that made the whole thing possible. The guardianship petition was set to be heard by the household chancellor, a careful, honest, but cautious official who might, faced with 2 months of manufactured facts, feel bound to grant it. But the chancellor served at the pleasure of the king. And a crown prince could, if he moved quickly and told his father just enough to earn it, have that hearing asterisk removed, taken out of the chancery, and set before the king himself, in open household court, on the very day Morwenna expected her quiet victory. She would arrive expecting to say her reasonable things to a cautious clerk. She would find herself saying them to the King of Eldermore with a serjeant's book, a nurse's sealed letter, a restored mother, and the truth all waiting in the same room. She would have built the stage herself, brick by careful brick, for 2 months. We had only to change who sat in the gallery. It could work, Rowan said slowly, but it hangs on one thing, Vale. It hangs on my father. He has to be willing to sit that hearing and asterisk it, hear his own wife say a cold thing about his own granddaughter, and not stop his ears the way he has stopped them for 10 years. If I misjudge him, if I tell him too much too soon and he warns her to keep peace, or too little and he does not come, we lose everything, and you and I both spend the rest of our service at the coldest gate in the realm. Then you had better not misjudge him, I said. Rowan almost smiled. No, he said, I had better not. He went to the king that night. I was not in the room, and Rowan told me only the shape of it afterward, but the shape was enough. He did not accuse. He had learned that much from the whole affair, that an accusation against Morwenna, laid before the king, would summon 10 years of trained patience to her defense before the first fact was even heard. So he did not say your wife is a schemer. He said instead, Father, there is a matter about Maelin I cannot resolve, and I need you to hear it yourself before it goes to the chancery, because it touches Isolde's line, and I do not think it should be decided by a clerk. He named the late Queen Isolde, the king's first love, dead these 10 years and never once replaced in the deepest chamber of the old man's heart, and he named her granddaughter, and he asked only that the king take the guardianship hearing to himself, into open household court, and listen before anyone decided anything. The king, Rowan said, went very quiet at Isolde's name. And then he asked one question, and it was the question of a man who was not, whatever his patience, a fool. Is my wife at the center of this, Rowan? And Rowan told the truth. Yes, Father, and I am asking you not to decide that tonight. I am asking you only to hear asterisk it. If I am wrong, you will see I am wrong in an hour in open court, and I will bear whatever you think right for having troubled you. But if I am not wrong, Father, if I am not wrong, then in 3 days a clerk grants a petition, and Isolde's granddaughter passes quietly into a keeping she should never be in, and it becomes law, and none of us can undo it. Give me the hearing, sit it yourself, and then decide. I have thought often about what it cost that old man to say yes. To sit a hearing knowing his wife might stand at the center of it. To risk hearing, in open court, a thing about the woman he had married in his loneliness that he could never after unhear. A weaker man or a more comfortable one would have refused, would have kept the peace, told Rowan not to make trouble, let the clerk grant the petition, and never had to know. It is the choosing to asterisk here asterisk that is the hard thing. Almost anyone can act once the truth is unavoidable, but the king's whole reign had been built on making truths avoidable for the sake of a quiet house. That night he unmade that habit. He looked at his son and he said, "Bring it to me, all of it, in open court 3 days hence, and Rowan, if you are wrong, God help you. But if you are right," and here Rowan said the old king's voice changed, and the patient husband fell away and the king of Eldermore stood up in him. "If you are right, then no man's peace in this house is worth what has been done, and I will want to know it, whatever it costs me to know." We had our hearing, and now there were 3 days to make ready. I spent them as a sergeant spends the last days before a battle, checking every piece of the line. My book I copied out fair, so that a clean dated account could be laid before the king while the original, inworn and true, stood as its warrant. Rowan sent word to Dame Ashby to hold herself ready, and to the honest deputy chancellor, and to the groundsmen and footmen I had marked as men who had seen small pieces of the truth and would tell it plainly if asked. And we did one thing more, the two of us, that mattered more than any of the papers. We made certain that in the 3 days before the hearing, Princess Maelin was not left to face it frightened and alone. For the child, remember, knew none of this. She knew only that her mother had gotten past the door once and been kept away since, that the attendants had grown harder and the wing tighter, that some tension she could feel but not name had wound the whole west wing to a pitch. A 9-year-old feels a coming storm the way a horse does, without knowing its shape, and it is a cruel thing to leave a child to feel that alone. So I did the one thing I could still do from my post. On each of those 3 mornings when Maelin was walked past me to her lessons, I made certain, attendance or no attendance, that she caught my eye, and I gave her each time a small steady nod. Not a smile. A smile would have been remarked. Only a nod, the kind one soldier gives another before a hard thing, the kind that says stand fast. It is almost over. You are not alone. And on the 3rd morning, the morning of the hearing itself, she gave it back to me, a small grave nod, her chin up, her frightened folded hands unfolding just a little, and I tell you that of all the honors I have been paid in a long life of service, the trust in that child's answering nod is the one I have kept closest. The hearing was set for the 3rd hour of the afternoon, in the lesser hall of Harrowgate, which the king used for household matters. Morwenna arrived believing she came to a formality. I know she believed it, because I watched her come in. I was posted at the hall, Rowan had seen to that the interior serjeant who knew the whole of it would stand the door where he could see and be seen, and I watched Queen Consort Morwenna enter that hall like a woman arriving at a garden party. She was perfectly composed. She had Lady Verena at her side and Lord Cassius a pace behind, and she carried in her own gloved hand a slim folder of papers, her reasonable answers, no doubt, one for each brick of her wall. She had expected the cautious chancellor. She had prepared for a clerk. She glanced, I think, at the raised chair at the head of the hall and registered only slowly that it was not the chancellor's chair at all. It was the king's, and the king was in it. I saw the exact moment she understood. It was very small, she was too well made to gasp or falter, but I was watching for it, and I saw the smooth glass of her face go, for the space of one breath, entirely still, the way water goes still the instant before it is struck. She had come to say her scheme to a clerk in the quiet where she was strong. She found herself about to say it to the king in the open, where the whole of her 2 months' careful work was about to be spoken aloud in front of the one man in the realm who could undo it all with a word. And then, this is the thing I have never forgotten about her, and the thing that made her dangerous, she recovered. In one breath she took in the king, the open court, the deputy chancellor, the crown prince standing grave to one side, even the serjeant at the door, and she made the only calculation left to her: that she was already committed, that the petition was filed and the facts were arranged in her favor, and that a bold woman who has built her lie well does not retreat from it. She presses it, because the facts, she believed, were still on her side. She had spent 2 months making the truth look like her lie. She would simply say her lie boldly to the king and trust the arranged facts to carry it, exactly as she had always meant to. She did not know that we had spent those same 2 months making sure the truth would be standing in the room when she did. The king raised his hand for silence, and the hearing began. The king spoke first, and he spoke plainly. He said that a petition had been laid before the household to settle the guardianship of the young Princess Maelin, and that because the matter touched the line of the late Queen Isolde, he had chosen to hear it himself. He said that the petitioner would state her case, and that any who had knowledge of the young princess's welfare would be heard after. And then he sat back and he said to Morwenna, in a voice I could not read and neither, I think, could she, "You have asked to be given the keeping of my granddaughter. Tell this court why." And Morwenna, God help her, told him, "She was very good. I will grant her that to my grave." She rose, and she was all warmth and reluctance and reasonable sorrow, and she made her case the way she had made her wall brick by careful brick, each one true seeming, each one laid to hold the weight of the lie. She spoke of dear Maelin's welfare. She spoke of a child who had grown, she said, unsettled and withdrawn, and here was the cold genius of it, for the child had grown withdrawn, and Morwenna named the very fading she herself had caused and offered it as proof the girl needed her. She spoke of a mother, Princess Alaric, who, she said it with such sorrow, had not attended her daughter in over 2 months, who had left the child's care wholly to the household, who could not, whatever her love, be relied upon to serve. She had the daybook cited. 11 visits, she said, and here she turned it inside out. 11 times the household had gently kept an anxious, unreliable mother from unsettling a fragile child. She spoke of the staff she had been forced to renew for the girl's good. And she came at the last to the thing itself, to the fortune, though she draped it in duty. And she said that since the girl's own mother could not serve, and the child's future and her inheritance both required a steady hand, she asked only, out of love for Isolde's granddaughter, to be granted the guardianship of the girl and the management of her affairs until the child came of age. There it was, the whole cold thing said aloud in the open in the king's own hall, out of her own mouth. She had done what no dark passage could have made her do. She had spoken her scheme entire, because she believed the arranged facts would make it sound like love. She had built the stage, and she had walked onto it, and she had said her lines. And then the king turned, and he looked at his son, and he said, "You asked to be heard after. Be heard." Rowan did not raise his voice. He never did. He simply began, quietly, to take the wall apart. He took the visits first. He asked the deputy chancellor to read into the record the 11 entries from the daybook, the 11 times Princess Alara had asked to see her daughter. Then he asked me, by name, serjeant of the interior watch, to state to the king what I had recorded on those same 11 days. And I told the king, flat and dated and dry, what my book held, that on each of those days the mother had come to the door and been turned away, not by the child's condition, but by an attendant who reported to Lady Verena, on reasons given in the same hand that filled the daybook. 11 refusals, not a mother who would not come, a mother kept out. And I laid my book, my worn true book, in the deputy chancellor's hands and the fair copy before the king, and I said, "Every hour is set down, your majesty, as it happened, kept from before any of this could be foreseen. It answers the daybook line for line." I saw Morwenna's composure take its first true crack. She had not known about the book. No one had. The furniture had kept it. Rowan took the staff next. He named Dame Ashby, retired at her own request, the daybook said, and then he had her brought in, and the old woman came into that hall with her chin up like a drill sergeant's, and she laid before the king the letter of her dismissal, under the Queen Consort's own seal, forbidding her all contact with the child she had raised from the cradle. Retired at her own request. The letter gave it the lie in Morwenna's own hand. And Dame Ashby, asked by the king to speak plainly, spoke plainly. that she had served that child 20 years, that the child had been happy and running and full of laughter until 8 weeks passed, and that she had been cast out without cause and forbidden the girl for one reason only, which any fool could see, because she loved the child and would have stood between her and whatever was being done. "I have raised that little girl since she could stand, Your Majesty," the old woman said, and her voice shook not with fear but with fury, "and I will tell you to your face that she was never withdrawn nor unsettled nor fragile a day in her life until that woman set out to make her so. You are being told the girl is sick to prove she needs a keeper. She is not sick. She is lonely. They made her lonely on purpose, and now they hold up the loneliness as the reason." The hall was very quiet, and the king's face, which had begun the hearing unreadable, was no longer unreadable at all. Morwenna moved to answer smooth still, reaching for another reasonable curtain, and Rowan let her, and then he laid down the last thing, the thing that turned suspicion into certainty, and he laid it down gently, which was worse than if he had shouted it. He asked the deputy chancellor to read the terms of the late Queen Isolde's settlement. The fortune, entire, settled on Alara for her life and thereafter on Maelin, and the clause, providing that the management of it might fall to whatever member of the household could show the girl's own guardians unable to serve. He read it into the silence, and then Rowan said, without heat, only laying the two things side by side for the king to see. "For 2 months, the young princess's mother has been shown to the record as unable to serve. 11 times she came, and 11 times she was turned away, and each turning was entered as her failure. The staff who loved the child were sent off and forbidden her. The doors between the girl and her family were locked and the keys mislaid. And in 11 days' time, a petition was to be heard, this petition, asking that, because the mother is unable to serve, the guardianship and the fortune both should pass to the one member of the household who arranged, brick by brick, to make her unable." He looked at Morwenna then for the first time, and his voice never rose. "You did not find a lonely child, madam. You made one. And you made her to prove she needed you, and you needed her to reach what was never yours, Isolde's fortune, through Isolde's granddaughter, taken from Isolde's own daughter by a wall of reasonable words. That is not guardianship. That is theft, done slowly enough to look like care." And there it was, all of it in the open in the king's hall, the 2 months of quiet cruelty laid bare not by a shout but by a settlement, a daybook, a serjeant's dated book, and an old nurse's letter under the schemer's own seal. There was no reasonable curtain left to hang. Everyone had been drawn back. I have wondered since what Morwenna might have done had she been a different woman, whether a wiser villain might have wept or repented or thrown herself on the king's mercy. She did none of these. Smooth glass does not weep, it shatters. Cornered with the truth standing all around her in the room, she did the thing that finished her. She turned on the child. "The girl is difficult and delicate," she said, and her voice at last lost its warmth and showed the cold under it. "And someone must have the ordering of her and her fortune both, and it will not be a mother who cannot even." Enough. It was the king. He had risen from his chair. I had served King Alaric a long time, and I had seen him gentle, and I had seen him grieved, and I had seen him keep the peace of his house at the cost of his own being right more times than I could count. I had never, in all those years, seen what I saw now. He came down from the raised chair, and he crossed the hall, and he stood before his wife, and when he spoke his voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of the stone. "You will not finish that sentence," he said. "You will not, in my hall, before my court, call my granddaughter difficult and delicate to justify the 2 months you spent making her so. I have heard the whole of it now. I have heard it in your own words and in the record, and from an old woman who loved that child more in one letter than you have shown in 2 years, and I will not unhear it, though God knows there was a time I would have tried." He drew a breath, and I saw the cost of it in his face. "I gave you the benefit of every doubt for 10 years, Morwenna, for the peace of this house. I told myself your coldness was reserve, and your management was care. And while I looked away for the sake of peace, you counted on exactly that. You built your wall brick by brick knowing I would not look because I never had. That is the part I will carry, and it is mine to carry. But the child does not carry it. The child comes home. He turned from her then, as if she were already finished, and he gave his judgment to the hall. It was swift and it was total. The guardianship petition was struck, not deferred, not sent back to the chancery, but struck entire and forbidden ever to be renewed. The management of Queen Isolde's settlement, which Morwenna had schemed to take, the king placed formally and permanently with Princess Alara, the child's own mother, as Isolde's will had always intended, and he named the honest deputy chancellor and the crown prince as its overseers, so that never again could any member of the household reach for it through the girl. Every attendant Morwenna had installed in the West Wing was dismissed that same hour. Dame Ashby was restored to her place and her charge on the spot, by the king's own word, and no letter under any seal, he said, shall ever part you from that child again while I live. The locked doors were ordered opened, the mislaid keys found or the locks struck off, the passage between mother and daughter thrown open for good. And the frightened attendant who had once stepped aside for Alara, I put in a word for her, quietly, afterward, and she was not turned out with the rest but only moved to honest work, for she had done a frightened kindness at the one moment it mattered, and I did not think a frightened kindness should be paid the same coin as a willing cruelty. As for Morwenna herself and her 2 grown children who had carried her notes up the back stair, the king did not thunder, and he did not have them dragged away, for that was not his way, and it was not, in the end, what justice required. He required something colder and more final. Lord Cassius and Lady Verena were removed from the household, and from every office and honor it had given them, and sent from Harrogate that week to a distant estate, there to live quietly on what was their own and never again to hold any place near the king's family. And Morwenna, the Queen Consort, his own wife, the king addressed last, and to her he was most quiet of all. He did not put her away in chains, nor shame her in the public square. A king does not need to, and the doing of it would only have taught the realm that his house had held such a thing. He simply stripped from her every particle of authority within the household, dissolved her council, barred her forever from the West Wing and from any least contact with the young princess, and sent her to live out her days in a far house of the realm under the watch of honest people, with nothing left to her but the title and the cold comfort of it. You wanted the ordering of a child and a fortune, he told her. You shall have the ordering of nothing to the end of your days. Go. And she went. Smooth to the last, she inclined her head, as though it were her own choice, and she walked from that hall with her back straight and her face still, but she walked out of it with nothing, and everyone in the room knew it, and I think even she knew it under the glass. The wall she had spent 2 months building had come down in a single afternoon, and it had come down because a prince at the top of the house and a serjeant at the bottom of it had each, separately and then together, refused to call a slow cruelty by the reasonable name it wore. But I have not told you the best of it, and the best of it did not happen in that hall. It happened afterward in the corridor, where the whole thing had begun. The child, you see, had been kept from the hearing rightly, for no 9-year-old should sit and hear such things said of her, and Rowan and I had both been fierce about that from the first. Maelin had spent that afternoon in her rooms with the one honest attendant left, knowing only that something large was being decided about her, and not knowing which way it would fall. And so it fell to Dame Ashby, restored not an hour before by the king's own word, to be the one to go and tell her. I was posted at the corridor when it happened, and I will carry the sight of it as long as I carry anything. Dame Ashby came down the west corridor at a pace no dignified nurse should keep, and the door of Maelin's rooms opened, and the child looked up, and for one instant she did not believe it, because she had been taught for 8 weeks not to believe in the people she loved coming back. And then she believed it, and she was across that room and into the old woman's arms so fast that Ashby staggered, and the two of them stood there in the doorway holding on to each other, the old nurse and the small princess, both of them weeping, neither of them able to say a word. And down the corridor running came Princess Ilara, the door between them thrown open at last, the wall gone, and behind her, tumbling and shouting, came Torrin the Grave and Bram the Small, who had been kept from their sister for 2 months and did not intend to be kept another minute. And they all of them came together in that corridor in a great tangle of arms, the mother and the 3 children and the old nurse, in the very place where I had watched the child fade for 6 weeks, and the corridor that had been so terribly quiet was full of noise, full of weeping, full of a child's real laughter spilling down the marble like water, the way it used to, the way it was always meant to. I stood my post. It was not my place to be in that tangle, and I did not want to be. A serjeant's joy is to see the thing he guarded made safe, not to be thanked for it. So I stood at attention at the end of the corridor with my eyes forward, as a king's guard does, and I let them have their reunion without a stranger's eyes on it. But Maelin found me. She came away from the tangle. I heard her small feet on the marble, and she came down the corridor to where I stood, and she stopped in front of me and looked up. She was crying and laughing both at once, her face a ruin of it, and she did not fold her hands the way they had taught her. She had already forgotten how. And she looked up at me, and I looked down at her, and for a moment neither of us said anything, the way it had been in all those weeks when a look was all we were allowed. Then she said very seriously in the small clear voice of a child saying the most important thing she knows, "You saw, all the time. You saw and you nodded at me and you didn't go away." "No, Princess," I said, "I did not go away." "Mother says you kept a book," she said. "She says you wrote down every day so the king would believe us. She says nobody knew you were watching, but you were watching the whole time so that when someone big enough to fix it came, you'd have it ready." She frowned, working it out, the way Torrin worked things out. "You were waiting for somebody to help. And you were still helping while you waited. I have been paid many honors in a long service. I have stood the king's own funeral escort. I have been named in a dispatch and given the ribbon on my chest by a sovereign's hand. And none of it, I say this as an old man now, and I have had years to weigh it, none of it has ever meant to me what it meant to have a 9-year-old girl look up at me in a corridor and understand, entirely and exactly, what a sergeant of the guard is for. That is the whole of the trade, Princess," I told her, "to stand where I can see, to not go away, and to keep watch until the help comes and to be part of the help while I wait." She thought about that. And then she did a thing that no protocol I ever learned had a rule for, and that I would not have stopped for any protocol in the world. She reached up and took my white-gloved hand in both of her small ones, and she held it a moment and she said, "Thank you for seeing me." And then she let go and turned, and ran back down the corridor to her mother and her brothers and her old nurse, running, mind you, the way she was always meant to, and the sound of it filled the west wing, and I stood my post, and I let no man see that a sergeant of the king's guard had, for the first time in 20 years of service, a hard time keeping his eyes forward. That is the whole of the affair, or nearly. Crown Prince Rowan came to me some days after, when the wing had settled and the child had bloomed back into herself, so fast it was as though the 8 weeks had never been. He thanked me, properly, gravely, the way he did everything, and he told me the king had asked to know the name of the interior sergeant who had kept the book, and that my name had been set down in a place where such names are kept. He offered me advancement. There was a captaincy going, he said, at the great gates, with the crowds and the cameras and the thumbnail glory, and it was mine if I wanted it. I thanked him, and I asked to stay where I was. He understood at once, he was that kind of man, but he asked me anyway so that I would say it aloud, and I have always been glad he did. "Why, sergeant?" "Most men would take the gates." "Most men would," I said, But the gates guard a symbol, your highness, and there are 100 good men to stand them. The corridors guard the living, and I have learned that the wrongs which destroy a house do not come to the gates where everyone is looking. They come to the quiet corridors at midnight, dressed as rearrangements, where no one thinks to watch. I looked down the west corridor, where I could hear, even then, a child laughing behind the tall clocks the way she used to. Somebody has to stand where he can see. I would rather it were me. So I stayed. I stood those corridors another 11 years, until my knees gave out and a younger man took the post, and in all those years the West Wing was never quiet in the wrong way again, because they knew, all of them, the family and the household both, that the furniture in the corridor had eyes, and that the man in the red coat was not marching or saluting or standing for the cameras. He was noticing. He was not going away, and he was keeping watch until the help came and being part of the help while he waited. That is the whole of the trade. It was always the whole of the trade. And if you should ever pass a king's guard standing his silent post, not at the great gates where the crowds gather, but in some quiet interior corridor where there is no glory and no camera, and nothing at all to see but a red coat and a still face, do not think him only furniture. Do not think him only a symbol. Look at his eyes and remember a serjeant named Corwin Vale, and a little princess who was fading in a quiet the wrong way, and understand what that stillness is really for. He is watching, he is not going away. And somewhere behind a locked door that no one else has noticed yet, there may be a child who needs exactly that.